We're taught to see history as a story of progress, grand empires, soaring cathedrals, and the slow march towards civilization. It's a comfortable narrative, but beneath the polished surface of history lies a buried layer, a chilling reality recorded not in scrolls, but in bone. This is the archaeology of fear. This is the history our textbooks often overlook, the moments of ritualistic brutality and catastrophic death that defy easy explanation. Forget ghosts and monsters. The real horror is etched in the forensic evidence left behind by our ancestors. To earn its place in this series, a historical event must meet three criteria. First, it must be real, verified by modern science. We only deal in proven fact. Second, the motive must be profoundly unsolved, a perfect historical cold case. And third, it must possess a shocking, visceral element that transcends simple murder, a ritualistic edge or a massive scale. We're hunting for the true enigmas of human darkness. Our first mystery takes us to medieval England, a land gripped by the terror of the Norse invaders, the Vikings. From the 8th to the 11th centuries, the Viking Age was defined by brutal raids and mass slaughter. English chroniclers recorded endless accounts of these heathen men. History remembers the massacres the Vikings committed against the English. But what happens when the victim is a Viking? What happens when a Norse warrior meets a fate so brutal and meticulously organized that it suggests a deep, terrifying hatred? The discovery was completely accidental. In 2009, near Weymouth in Dorset, England, archaeologists were monitoring a construction site. They expected to find minor Roman remains. Instead, they discovered a mass grave, a large, shallow pit, unlike any battlefield burial site ever found in Britain. This was the result of a single, catastrophic event. Forensic investigation soon confirmed the horror. This was not the respectful work of burying the fallen. This was a place of ritualistic organized death, the Ridgeway Hill execution pit. The pit contained the remains of at least 54 individuals. But what immediately confounded the forensic team was the gruesome separation of their parts. The pit was organized into two distinct, deliberate piles. One held 54 headless torsos, stacked haphazardly. The second pile, right next to them, contained 51 severed heads, placed neatly to the side. The discrepancy, 54 bodies, 51 heads, remains a small, unsettling mystery. This was not the quick, dirty work of war. This was a systematic process of execution, butchery, and display. This demanded a motive beyond simple warfare. The first crucial question, identity, was soon solved. Examinations of the teeth confirmed all the victims were young males, mostly between 16 and 25. There were no women or children. Crucially, isotope analysis of their teeth, which reveals where a person grew up, provided the definitive answer. All the men were non-local, and their diet was consistent with a cold northern climate. DNA analysis confirmed it. The overwhelming majority were of Scandinavian descent. They were Vikings, the very invaders whose brutality had terrorized England for centuries. Forensic analysis of the neck vertebrae revealed the shocking, ritualistic nature of the killings. Most were decapitated from the front, not with a clean blow from behind. This suggests they were forced to kneel and watch their executioner approach. Furthermore, the decapitation wasn't a single clean strike. Many vertebrae show multiple clumsy chop marks, indicating the executioner was inexperienced, or that the victims struggled violently. The forensic team concluded the execution involved a massive level of terror and physical resistance. This was a public, drawn-out spectacle, intended not just to kill but to humiliate. A key piece of evidence that rules out a conventional burial is the complete absence of clothing or weapons. Every one of the 54 men was naked. For a Viking warrior, being buried naked without his sword or axe was the ultimate spiritual humiliation, denying him entry into Valhalla. The execution was intended to strip them not only of life, but of their dignity and their warrior identity. This speaks to a profound, unsolved hatred held by the executioners. Radiocarbon dating placed the execution sometime between 910 AD and 1030 AD, a time of intense warfare between the Anglo-Saxons and the Danes. This window covers two major possibilities. Theory A, the St. Brice's Day Massacre. In 1002 AD, King Ethelred the Unready ordered the massacre of all Danes living in England. The scale and brutality of the Ridgeway execution fit the rage of this decree. Theory B, Cnut's army defectors. Another theory suggests the men were Viking mercenaries who deserted King Cnut the Great's army, only to be captured and executed by local Saxon militias as a warning. Both theories require meticulous organization and intense hatred. Why execute them with such care, separating the heads from the bodies? The precise event and the people responsible remain completely unsolved. The Headless Vikings of Dorset are an archaeology of pure, deliberate horror. We know who they were, young Viking warriors. We know how they died, executed naked, with repeated, fearful blows, and their heads severed for display. But the ultimate questions, who were the executioners and what terrifying message did they intend to send by piling the skulls so neatly apart from the bodies, remain stubbornly locked in the Dorset mud. This level of intentional brutality was not unique. It suggests a dark, ritualistic impulse that appears throughout history. Next, we travel to another mass grave, one that suggests a horror far older and more profound than any Viking raid. We leave the rage of the Viking Age and travel back nearly 3 millennia to the Bronze Age, a period we often imagine as pastoral and relatively peaceful, defined by the slow adoption of metal tools and the building of simple earthen mounds. This wasn't an age of mass warfare or standing armies, yet in the quiet hills of Somerset, England, a discovery was made that tore through this peaceful image, revealing a prehistoric act of violence so extreme, so unique, that it remains one of the darkest unsolved ritual mysteries in British archaeology, the Pit of Charterhouse Warren. The site, known as Charterhouse Warren, has a history linked to lead mining. Back in 1947, a group of speleologists, that's cave explorers, were examining a shallow natural limestone fissure in the hill when they noticed something disturbing protruding from the dirt: human bone. Over the next few decades, excavations revealed that this natural shaft wasn't a burial cave, but a deliberate mass grave containing a catastrophic number of human remains that had been tossed or shoved into the pit. Forensic evidence confirmed a single terrifying event had occurred here during the late Bronze Age, roughly 3,500 years ago. Forensic analysis confirmed the pit contained the skeletal remains of at least 37 individuals, and critically, this wasn't a group of warriors or men of a single age. The pit contained a cross-section of an entire community: men, women, and children of all ages, from infants to elders. The victims represented a complete social unit, suggesting that an entire community, likely a family or small tribe, was rounded up and systematically eliminated. Their remains were found jumbled together, tossed down the fissure without any attempt at a formal burial, suggesting they were treated as nothing more than disposable refuse after a horrific event. But this is where the peaceful image of the Bronze Age completely shatters. An exhaustive forensic examination of the bones revealed overwhelming evidence of extreme, deliberate post-mortem butchery. The bodies were not simply killed, they were dismembered and processed. Specifically, archaeologists found decapitation marks on the neck vertebrae, similar to the Vikings, indicating beheading. They found deep-cut marks at the major joints, shoulders, hips, and knees, used to sever and separate the limbs. And most chillingly, clear scraping and slicing marks on the long bones and skulls, indicating the deliberate removal of muscle tissue and tendons. The method of butchery was systematic and skilled, identical to the marks left on animal carcasses being processed for food. The presence of such skilled butchery, used to strip the flesh from the bones, leaves two horrifying, unsolved possibilities. Was this a brutal massacre, where the victors simply defiled the dead bodies of their enemies? Or was this something far darker, ritualistic, post-mortem cannibalism? The systematic nature of the defleshing, particularly the breaking of specific bones to access the marrow, strongly suggests the bodies were consumed. This act of othering, the complete denial of human dignity by consuming the dead, would be the ultimate act of vengeance or ritualistic annihilation by a rival group. This level of violence is completely unparalleled in Bronze Age Britain. What motive could possibly drive such extreme violence against an entire community, including infants? One theory is a simple vengeance or land dispute. A rival tribe may have executed the group following a local territorial war. However, a traditional massacre usually doesn't involve the systematic butchery and consumption of the victims. Another possibility is economic stress. The late Bronze Age was a time of resource scarcity and early climate cooling. The motive could have been desperate survival, with the victims being an easily eliminated rival resource competitor. Or it could have been a dark religious ritual, perhaps involving the belief that consuming an enemy's strength transfers their power. Given how rare such sites are, a ritualistic motive remains highly plausible, yet completely unsolved. Adding an unexpected layer to the horror is the fact that the pit's usage coincided with a period of major climatic instability and disease. While no direct plague DNA was recovered from Charterhouse Warren itself, this mass death event occurs during the same general time frame as the earliest evidence for the Bronze Age strain of Yersinia pestis, the plague in Europe. Could the violence have been driven by desperation, with a rival group trying to eliminate a settlement ravaged by disease? Was the butchery a grotesque attempt to stop the spread of an unknown malady? The overlap with a disease-ridden era suggests an unsolved biological pressure might have been driving this extreme violence. The manner of the burial itself is a key clue to the perpetrator's intentions. The victims were pushed into a natural fissure, suggesting a quick, clandestine attempt to dispose of the evidence. They weren't left exposed but sealed away. And unlike many ancient mass graves, there is no evidence of the perpetrators being buried nearby. No victor's monument, no commemorative burial. The silence regarding the killers is absolute. This suggests the event was shrouded in shame or fear. The survivors or perpetrators did not wish for the event to be memorialized, only hidden. The Pit of Charterhouse Warren is not part of a common trend. It is a profound anomaly. Other Bronze Age mass graves show evidence of simple battle wounds, but none exhibit this systematic, skilled post-mortem dismemberment and processing of flesh. It stands as a terrifying one-off event, an absolute outlier in the archaeological record of a time we thought was defined by smaller, familial social units. Its sheer uniqueness means we can't use comparative archaeology to find a parallel motive or ritual, leaving the event isolated in its horror. The Pit of Charterhouse Warren shows us that the ultimate taboo, the deliberate, systematic butchery of an entire community, is a horror as old as human history itself. We know they were massacred, dismembered, and most likely consumed. But why did a Bronze Age community choose this act of ultimate defilement? The motive remains locked in the earth. Our next mystery is also defined by a body given a dishonorable, terrified end. We move to ancient Egypt, to a mummy whose face is forever frozen in a terrifying silent scream. In 1886, deep within a hidden tomb in Egypt, archaeologists stumbled upon one of the greatest discoveries in history, the Deir el-Bahari cache. It was a secret royal safe house containing the perfectly preserved mummies of nearly 50 of Egypt's most legendary pharaohs and queens. Here lay Rameses the Great, Thutmose III, and a host of other titans of the ancient world, all moved here centuries ago to protect them from tomb robbers. But amongst this gathering of gilded royalty, there was one horrifying anomaly. A mummy given no name, no fine linen wrappings, and no golden sarcophagus. Instead, he was bound in a simple, ritually impure goatskin. And his face was forever frozen in a silent, agonizing scream. This was unidentified man E, soon to be nicknamed the Screaming Mummy. His story isn't just a tale of a gruesome death. It's one of Egypt's most chilling political mysteries, a story of conspiracy, treason, and a curse that lasted for 3,000 years. Just look at his face. This isn't just an open mouth. It's a mask of pure, unadulterated horror. His lips and cheeks are pulled back, exposing his teeth. Modern forensic experts call this a cadaveric spasm, an incredibly rare phenomenon that happens when the body's muscles lock into position at the exact moment of a violent, agonizing death. It's as if his final moments of terror were flash frozen for eternity. As if that wasn't enough, his hands and feet were tightly bound, and his body was unnaturally bloated, signs that point to a rapid, violent end. This was a man who died terrified, and that terror was intentionally preserved for millennia. For an ancient Egyptian, burial was everything. It was the sacred process that guaranteed passage to the afterlife. Royal mummies were wrapped in hundreds of meters of pristine linen, placed in ornate coffins, and surrounded by treasures and prayers. The Screaming Mummy received the exact opposite. He was wrapped in a rough, dirty goatskin, an object considered so ritually impure and unclean in ancient Egypt that it was a symbol of sin and disgrace. This wasn't a rushed or poor burial. It was a deliberate act of damnation. It was the ancient equivalent of an exorcism, designed to trap his soul, to deny him any chance of eternal life. He was tossed into a cheap, plain wooden coffin with no name, no titles, and no spells to guide him. His very existence was meant to be erased from the sacred record, a punishment reserved for the worst of the worst. So who was this man? And what could he have possibly done to deserve such an agonizing death and cursed burial? The answer lies in one of the most dramatic events of the New Kingdom, the Harem Conspiracy against Pharaoh Rameses III. We know from an ancient court document, the Judicial Papyrus of Turin, that in 1155 BC Rameses III was assassinated in a palace coup. The plot was orchestrated by one of his secondary wives, Queen Tai, who desperately wanted her own son, Prince Pentewere, to seize the throne. The plot ultimately failed, and the papyrus meticulously records the trials of the conspirators. For decades, scholars theorized that the disgraced mummy was none other than the traitorous prince, but it wasn't until recently that science could finally weigh in. In 2012, a major scientific breakthrough blew the case wide open. DNA analysis was performed on both the screaming mummy and the mummy of Pharaoh Rameses III. The results were astounding. They shared the exact same Y-DNA haplogroup, a perfect father-son match. The forensic evidence also painted a clear picture. The mummy was a young man aged between 18 and 20 when he died, which aligns perfectly with Prince Pentewere's age at the time of the conspiracy trial. The genetic and forensic evidence all but confirms his identity. The screaming mummy is Prince Pentewere. The mystery was no longer who he was, but how he died in such agony, and why his burial was so uniquely horrific. The Judicial Papyrus offers a frustratingly vague clue. It states that Pentewere and some of the other high-ranking conspirators died of their own accord. This phrase is widely interpreted as a form of forced suicide. He was likely given a choice: take his own life to avoid the shame of a public execution. But a quiet, dignified suicide doesn't fit with the pure terror etched onto his face. So what really happened? 3 chilling possibilities remain. The first is poison. Not a quick-acting poison, but a slow, agonizing concoction that would cause the convulsions and muscle spasms that led to his final expression. The second is strangulation. A garrote or rope, tightened from behind, would leave few external marks, but would absolutely result in a face contorted in a struggle for air. The final and perhaps most terrifying theory is that he was buried alive. Forced into his coffin and left to suffocate, his final moments would have been a desperate, silent scream for air. The exact method remains a terrifying, unsolved puzzle. So, if Pentewere was given the dignity of taking his own life, why the screaming face and the cursed burial? It suggests a double punishment. The court may have allowed him to avoid public execution, but the powers that remained, perhaps his half-brother, the new Pharaoh Rameses IV, wanted to make an example of him. His agonizing death and cursed burial weren't just about punishment. They were about sending a message. The screaming face was meant to be a permanent, visible testament to the price of high treason, a warning to any who would dare challenge the throne. His shame was put on display for eternity. In 2012, modern technology gave us another clue. New CT scans of the mummy revealed some crucial details that weren't visible before. While his neck bones weren't broken, the scans showed distinct creases and folds of skin around his throat. These marks are consistent with constriction, such as from a rope used for strangulation. They could also be the result of severe swelling or edema that might occur with certain types of poison. The findings remain ambiguous, but they point to a swift, violent, and terrifying death that was intentionally hidden from the official record. But what about the mastermind of the whole plot, Queen Tai, Pentewere's mother? The papyrus confirms she was found guilty, but her ultimate fate is another unsolved piece of the puzzle. Her mummy has never been identified. Did she also suffer a secret, dishonorable death? The records show that other female conspirators faced punishments ranging from suicide to having their noses and ears cut off as a mark of shame. The fact that the royal cache only contained the cursed prince and the murdered pharaoh suggests that Tia's final fate was deliberately shrouded in secrecy and ritual shame, perhaps to prevent her tomb from ever becoming a shrine for rebellion. The screaming mummy is the frozen physical evidence of a desperate royal drama, a story of ambition, betrayal, and the ultimate brutal form of ancient justice. We know his name was Pentewere. We know he committed treason against his own father. And we know his end was pure agony, but the true horrifying method of his death remains forever locked in the silent scream on his face. It's a chilling reminder that even within the golden walls of a pharaoh's palace, fear and horror could be waiting in the shadows. We leap from the hidden brutality of ancient Egypt to a mystery that's chillingly modern, yet remains as impenetrable as any ancient script. The Taman Shud case, also known as the mystery of the Somerton man. It all begins in the early hours of December 1st, 1948, on a quiet Australian beach. A body is found slumped against a seawall. The man is well dressed in a suit and tie, but there is something deeply unsettling. Every single identifying label on his clothing has been meticulously cut away. He carried no wallet, no cash, and no documents. The cause of death was attributed to poisoning, but astonishingly, no trace of poison was ever found in his system. This man was a perfect cipher, an unknown identity, a hidden cause of death, and a message written in an unbreakable code. The victim, who would become known as the Somerton man, seemed intent on erasing his own existence. Every label from his expensive American-made clothing had been removed with surgical precision. The contents of his pockets were mundane, yet baffling. An unused train ticket to a nearby beach, some chewing gum, and a box of expensive Army Club cigarettes that mysteriously contained cheaper Kensitas cigarettes inside. This odd substitution suggested a deliberate effort to mislead or mask a habit. The body itself was perfectly preserved, leading forensic scientists to believe the man died just hours before he was found. The scene screamed of deliberate professional concealment. The case went from a simple unidentified body to an international sensation when detectives made a startling discovery. Hidden in a secret fob pocket of the man's trousers, a tiny, tightly rolled slip of paper was found. On it were two printed words, Taman Shud. The phrase is Persian, meaning "it is ended" or "finished." Investigators quickly traced this phrase to the final page of a rare 11th century collection of Persian poems by Omar Khayyam, titled The Rubaiyat. This confirmed the message wasn't random, but a deliberate signifier, a final statement, or perhaps a signal. This single slip of paper, torn from its source, was the first terrifying clue in a deepening enigma. With this new lead, police launched a massive public appeal to find the exact book the slip came from. Miraculously, a man came forward. He reported finding a rare edition of the Rubaiyat on the back seat of his unlocked car, which had been parked near Somerton Beach. The book's back cover was damaged, and its last page was missing, a perfect match for the Taman Shud fragment. This book was the unexpected Rosetta Stone everyone had been searching for, but it contained an even deeper secret. Scrawled in faint pencil on the back inside cover were two crucial pieces of information: a local phone number and a mysterious 5-line handwritten code. This 5-line code is the unbreakable core of the Taman Shud case. Composed of capital letters, with one line crossed out, this cipher has resisted every attempt at decipherment by the world's most skilled cryptographers, including analysts from Australian naval intelligence and military code-breaking experts. The letters seem random. They lack the repetition you'd see in a simple substitution cipher, and the message is so short that frequency analysis is virtually impossible. Is it a complex transposition cipher, a one-time pad, or something else entirely? The code's elegant simplicity is its shield. To this day, it remains an official cold case cipher, its message locked away in time. The medical mystery is just as profound as the code. An autopsy revealed the man's organs were severely congested, strongly suggesting he was poisoned by a fast-acting, lethal substance that caused death within minutes. However, the complete absence of any residue meant pathologists couldn't identify the toxic agent. Theories centered on a powerful, undetectable barbiturate, or a specialized cardiac poison that had been fully metabolized by the body. The fact that he simply walked onto the beach and died without a struggle initially pointed to suicide. Yet, the elaborate steps taken to hide his identity and carry a secret code suggest the cold precision of an execution. The definitive cause of death remains unsolved. The phone number found inside the book led police to a local woman named Jessica Ellen Thompson. Thompson, who lived near Somerton Beach, admitted that she had once owned that exact rare edition of the Rubaiyat, but claimed she'd given it away to a man named Alfred Boxall during World War II. When police showed her a plaster bust made from the Somerton man's face, witnesses reported that she was visibly shaken and nearly fainted, though she later officially denied knowing him or having any connection to his death. She remains the single most important and most frustrating human link in this case. She took her secrets to the grave, forever complicating the official narrative. Given the precision of the death, the use of an undetectable poison, the total erasure of identity, and an uncrackable code, the spy theory quickly became the most dominant explanation. Remember, 1948 was the height of the early Cold War, and Adelaide housed top-secret research facilities. The theory posits that the Somerton man was a Soviet or Eastern Bloc agent who was either murdered by rival agents or committed suicide after a failed mission to protect his network. The book and its code would have been a method of communication with a handler. While it's a compelling theory, there has never been any concrete evidence linking the man to any known intelligence service. The motive remains completely unsolved. The most significant breakthrough in the case didn't happen for over 70 years. In 2022, a team led by researcher Derek Abbott and forensic scientist Colleen Fitzpatrick successfully obtained a comprehensive DNA profile from hairs found embedded in the plaster cast of the man's face. Using forensic genealogy, they built an extensive family tree and finally, officially identified the Somerton man as Carl Charles Webb, a 43-year-old electrical engineer and instrument maker from Melbourne. Webb had been separated from his wife and apparently had an interest in poetry and horse racing. While his name is now known, the central mysteries, the code, the cause of death, and his connection to Jessica Thompson remain completely unsolved. The Taman Shud case has transitioned from an identity mystery to a cold-blooded motive and code mystery. We now know who the man was, Carl Webb, but we still don't know what killed him, what the code says, or why his death was so meticulously staged. The 5 lines of the cipher remain the central, unyielding enigma, It's a terrifying illustration of how modern cryptography can protect a secret history forever. Our journey now takes us into the dark, primeval forests of Neolithic Scandinavia, a time and place defined by sparse settlements and ancient burial mounds. In 2009, during an exploration of a flooded natural cave system near Lake Vättern in southern Sweden, cave divers made a profoundly disturbing discovery. Deep within that cold, watery labyrinth, they found a collection of human remains, deliberately and meticulously arranged in a gruesome pattern. This was the Cave of the Skulls, a Neolithic site that documents a ritualistic act of mass murder and display, dating back approximately 8,000 years. The cave held the skeletal remains of at least 9 individuals, 5 adults, both male and female, and 4 children, including a baby. The victims spanned a wide age range, suggesting they represented an entire family unit or a small kin group. The condition of the bones indicated they were all placed in the cave at roughly the same time. But this was no traditional burial. The bodies had been placed in the wet, cold cave and left to decompose in the water and mud, suggesting the final act was one of profound neglect and dishonor. The most disturbing aspect of the cave was the grotesque, meticulous arrangement of the bones. The remains were not simply tossed in, but carefully arranged on the cave floor. One adult skull, placed on a flat stone, was found with bone fragments wedged into its eye sockets and mouth, a possible symbolic act of blinding or silencing the dead. The limbs were often separated from the bodies, and some bones showed clear evidence of deliberate breakage. This suggests the bodies were manipulated after death, indicating a planned ritualistic event designed to achieve a purpose far beyond simple disposal. Forensic analysis confirmed that several of the individuals showed clear signs of trauma, inconsistent with a simple cave accident. The skulls of the adults showed evidence of blunt force trauma, suggesting heavy blows to the head. The arrangement of the skeletons strongly suggested that decapitation and dismemberment had occurred before. The bodies were placed in the cave. This was not a natural death site, it was a site of execution. The perpetrators took the time to process the bodies before placing them in the cold, watery depths, an act that seals the unsolved nature of this ancient crime. What motive could possibly drive a Neolithic group to execute an entire family unit, dismember them, and then arrange them in a dark, watery cave? One theory points to ritual sacrifice. The unique arrangement and the focus on the skulls suggest a religious offering to water or earth spirits, perhaps to ensure fertility or a successful hunting season. The cave's hidden nature would have made it an ideal ritual space. Another theory suggests an exorcism or a shame burial. The placement in the cold, wet cave and the destruction of the faces might have been an act to ritually bind and disgrace the victims, who were perhaps believed to be possessed or diseased, preventing their return as malevolent spirits. A third possibility is that it was a brutal warning to rival clans, with the skulls on stones signaling the terrifying dominance of the perpetrators. The decision to place the bodies in the cave's water is a key unsolved element. In many ancient cultures, water was seen as a boundary between worlds or a direct link to the underworld. Was the water a final resting place or a form of ritualistic purgatory? The cold, oxygen-poor water of the cave has a preserving effect, suggesting the perpetrators might have wanted the bodies to remain identifiable or at least visible for a time. This choice of a water burial contrasts sharply with the common cremation or earthen mound burials of the period, emphasizing the extraordinary and unsolved nature of the ritual. The Cave of the Skulls stands as a profound anomaly in the Neolithic archaeological record of Sweden. The typical burial of the period was a single intact body placed in an earthen mound, often with tools or artifacts. The mass death, the extreme dismemberment, and the lack of burial goods in this cave defy the established funerary traditions. Its sheer uniqueness means we cannot use comparative archaeology to find a parallel motive, suggesting a highly localized, unsolved catastrophe or ritual executed by a small, unique group. Excavations near the cave revealed evidence of shallow, deliberate pits and traces of fire just outside the entrance. This suggests that the final ritual, the dismemberment, the cleaning of the bones, and perhaps a sacrifice, may have taken place just outside the cave mouth before the remains were placed in the water. The fire could have been used for cooking, purification, or simply lighting the grim scene. This indicates a planned, controlled ritual site, not a spontaneous act of violence. The sequence of events, massacre, fire ritual, water burial, is utterly unsolved. And as with so many sites of extreme violence, the silence regarding the killers is absolute. There is no evidence of the perpetrators, no tools, no weapons, and no burial sites found nearby. The act was clandestine, executed in a remote location, and the evidence of the crime was shoved into a cold, dark fissure. This suggests the event was shrouded in shame, secrecy, or fear. The perpetrators did not wish for the event to be memorialized, only hidden. The identity and the fate of the killers remain completely unsolved. The Cave of the Skulls is a chilling window into the primal darkness of the Neolithic mind. We know they died violently, and we know they were arranged in a macabre water burial. But the terrifying ritualistic purpose, was it a sacrifice to the dark spirits or a deliberate attempt to exorcise the dead? The truth remains locked in the cold Swedish water. We now turn to a horror defined by the sheer scale of execution and the unsolved identity of the victims. We return to the brutal Viking Age, a time when the English kingdom of Wessex fought for its very survival against the relentless onslaught of the Danes. The history of this period is a ledger of Viking triumph and Saxon desperation. But our focus is a site where the roles were violently reversed, and Saxon revenge was executed with a cold ritualistic fury that defies the conventions of war. This is the story of the Headless Vikings of Dorset, discovered at Ridgeway Hill, a mass grave that remains an absolute, profound, and unsolved mystery of medieval justice and vengeance. In 2009, near the modern town of Weymouth, archaeologists were called to monitor a construction site for a new road. They were prepared for routine Roman ruins. Instead, they discovered a single large shallow pit, a massive mass grave located precisely at the highest point of a small ridge. This was clearly the result of a single catastrophic event, not a gradual cemetery. Forensic investigation quickly confirmed the horror. This was not a quick burial. This was the site of a meticulous ritualistic execution, leaving behind some of the most shocking forensic evidence of medieval brutality ever found. The pit contained the remains of at least 54 individuals, all young males. But what immediately confounded the forensic team was the grotesque separation of their parts. The pit was clearly organized into two distinct, deliberate piles. One pile contained 54 headless torsos, stacked haphazardly and unceremoniously in the pit's center. The second pile, located right next to the bodies, contained 51 severed heads, placed neatly and carefully to the side. The discrepancy in the count, 54 bodies, 51 heads, remains a small, chilling mystery. This two-stage process of execution, butchery, and macabre display required organization and a chilling, deliberate motive. The identity of the victims was solved by science, and it was conclusive. All were young males, overwhelmingly between the ages of 16 and 25. Critically, isotope analysis of their teeth, which traces the local water supply where a person grew up, confirmed that all the men were from somewhere else. Their diet was consistent with a cold, northern European climate. Further DNA analysis confirmed the overwhelming majority of the men were of Scandinavian descent. They were Vikings, the very invaders whose brutality had terrorized England. Intriguingly, their origins were diverse, ranging from Norway and Sweden to the Baltic states, suggesting they were part of a large multinational raiding or mercenary army. Forensic analysis of the neck vertebrae revealed the systematic, ritualistic nature of the killings. The vast majority of the men were executed by decapitation from the front, not a clean strike from behind. This suggests they were forced to kneel, naked, and watch the executioner approach, a terrifying moment of psychological torture before death. Furthermore, the decapitation was often not a single clean blow. Many of the vertebrae show multiple, tentative, and sometimes clumsy chop marks, indicating the executioner was inexperienced or that the victims struggled violently. The execution was a public, drawn-out spectacle, intended not just to kill, but to humiliate and display the fear of the Northmen. A critical clue to the motive is the complete absence of clothing, weapons, or any burial goods. Every one of the 54 men was stripped naked before or immediately after execution. They were tossed unceremoniously into the pit. For a Viking warrior, being buried naked, without his sword, axe, or even a simple finger ring, was the ultimate spiritual humiliation, denying him entry into Valhalla and robbing him of his dignity. This deliberate act of stripping them of their warrior identity speaks to a profound, organized, and unsolved hatred held by the executioners, going far beyond simple self-defense. The dating places the execution sometime between 910 and 1030 AD, a time of intense political chaos and warfare between the Anglo-Saxons and the Danes. This leaves two primary, plausible yet unsolved motives. Theory A, the St. Brice's Day Massacre. This is the most famous theory. In 1002 AD, the inept king Ethelred the Unready ordered the massacre of all Danes living in England. The scale and brutal execution methods found at Ridgeway fit the sudden, panicked, and organized rage of this royal decree. Theory B, Knut's army defectors. Another theory suggests the men were Viking mercenaries who had defected from the massive army of King Knut the Great, only to be captured and executed by local Saxon militias as a warning against desertion. Or Theory C, captured raiders. The men were simply a large, organized raiding party that was overwhelmingly defeated and executed in revenge by the local Dorset population. The final macabre detail is the discrepancy in the skull count. 54 bodies, 51 heads. This suggests that 3 of the heads were taken as trophies or were displayed elsewhere before the remainder were tossed into the pit. The separation of the bodies and the heads was clearly intended to create a display of terror. The executioners went to extreme lengths to ensure their deaths were a spectacle of organized vengeance, a message left for all to see. The identity of the 3 missing heads and their final destination remains completely unsolved. The clumsiness of the multiple chop marks on the vertebrae suggests the executioners were not professional soldiers. They were likely local Saxon militiamen, farmers or villagers, driven by a deep local hatred and a desire for vengeance against the Viking terror. This suggests the execution was a localized, spontaneous act of brutal retaliation, meticulously planned and executed by the community that had suffered the most. The collective memory of Viking violence drove this extreme, unsolved act of ritualistic fury. The Headless Vikings of Dorset are an archaeology of pure, deliberate horror. We know who they were, and we know they were stripped and ritually butchered. But the ultimate questions: who were the executioners and what terrifying, unique message did they intend to send by piling the skulls so neatly apart from the naked bodies, remains stubbornly locked in the Dorset mud. This collective fury against a perceived enemy is a recurring motif in horror history. We now turn to a unique mass death that was also sealed away, but this time in a high-altitude, desolate place. We journey from the icy seas of Scandinavia to the thin air of the Peruvian Andes, home of the Chachapoya, the legendary warriors of the clouds. This powerful civilization, which fiercely resisted the Inca Empire, built their cities on treacherous mountain ridges, using unique circular stone architecture. In the remote, desolate regions of their former territory, explorers have discovered a terrifying ritualistic display of human remains that defies all known burial practices and remains an absolute, profound, unsolved anthropological mystery. Explorers discovered a vast, shallow cave or overhang located on a sheer cliff face, a burial site that was also a fortress. Instead of finding individual sarcophagi or wrapped mummies, they discovered a chilling structure, an actual wall of skulls. This vertical wall was constructed using human skulls as the primary building material, cemented together with mud and clay, and backed by long bones like femurs and tibias. The sheer scale of the display suggests the systematic execution and collection of hundreds of individuals, creating a public, terrifying monument to death. The Wall of Skulls is not a collection of enemy soldiers. It is a display of the dead from a cross-section of society. Initial analysis confirmed the presence of men, women, and children spanning all ages. The condition of the remains suggests the victims were not naturally interred, but were defleshed and processed before their incorporation into the wall. Furthermore, many of the skulls show signs of deliberate modification. Some were drilled, and others showed post-mortem trauma, suggesting a secondary ritual was performed on the remains after death. The purpose of the skull wall is the core of the unsolved mystery. Two theories dominate. The first is that the wall was a ritualistic fortification. The Chachapoya were renowned warriors. They may have believed that incorporating the skulls of ancestors or conquered enemies into their defenses would grant the site spiritual protection and strength against invaders, like the Inca. The second theory is that it was a public display of terror. The wall was intended as a massive public message of dominance against rivals or as a warning to their own population. The sheer visibility of the site on the cliff face suggests the message was meant to be seen from the valleys below, inspiring fear in any potential enemy. The combination of architecture and human remains defies all known burial practices of the Andes, cementing its unsolved status. One major theory suggests the skull wall is a monument to the Chachapoya's eventual defeat by the powerful Inca Empire. The Inca were known for their practice of creating trophy skulls from defeated enemies. The vast systematic nature of the collection suggests a large-scale execution, potentially of Chachapoya captives or rebels. If true, the wall would be a brutal memorial to Inca conquest, constructed by the victors to permanently subjugate the Chachapoya spiritual landscape. The challenge is the lack of definitive Inca artifacts at the site. Alternatively, the skull wall may have been an extreme form of ancestor veneration unique to the Chachapoya. Unlike the Inca, who preserved their mummies, the Chachapoya may have believed that by displaying the most sacred part of the body, the skull, the seat of the soul, they kept the power of their ancestors present and active. The skulls would be a direct link to the lineage and power of the tribe. This would imply the victims were not enemies, but their own sacred dead, used for a profound and unsolved religious purpose. Crucially, forensic evidence suggests the skulls were intentionally processed before being placed in the wall. Cut marks are visible around the base of the skull, indicating the heads were deliberately removed from the bodies. Furthermore, the brains and soft tissues were likely removed to prepare the bone for long-term display. This systematic, highly ritualized processing suggests the process was a specific cultural requirement, a sacred yet gruesome act whose purpose remains entirely unsolved. The location itself is a component of the mystery. The wall was constructed in a shallow cave, high on a sheer cliff, a location that is incredibly difficult and dangerous to access. This suggests the act was intended to be highly selective and ritualistic, reserved for a special class of individuals or victims. The immense logistical effort required to transport, prepare and cement together hundreds of skulls in this high-altitude remote location underscores the critical importance of the wall, even if its ultimate meaning remains unknown. The Chachapoya left behind no decipherable written language. Their history is recorded only in their remarkable architecture and their remains. This absolute lack of textual context is the primary reason the skull wall remains unsolved. Unlike the ancient Egyptians, we have no papyrus to tell us the wall's purpose. We are left only with the macabre visual evidence, forced to guess the intent of a people whose voices were silenced by conquest and time. The Chachapoya skull wall is a monument to an extreme, unsolved ritual of either ancestor veneration or political terror. The vast, staring display is a terrifying statement from a lost civilization. We know they collected the skulls systematically, but why they constructed this gruesome display remains a complete historical cipher. We now turn to a horror of organized, systematic disappearance. This was a civilization famous for its incredible engineering, its sprawling markets, and a spiritual devotion to human sacrifice on a scale unlike anything else in recorded history. The Aztec worldview revolved around a single stark necessity: feeding the gods with human life. Today our focus is on the terrifying ritual of the god Teutoburg, our Lord the Flayed One, and the archaeological evidence left behind, from the ritual pits to the very stones where victims met their gruesome end. The god Teutoburg was the patron deity of fertility, rebirth, agriculture, and even goldsmiths. The profound irony of linking renewal with such horror is the very core of his ritual. The Aztecs believed that Teutoburg flayed himself to provide food for humanity, much like a corn kernel sheds its outer layer to allow new life to sprout. To honor this god of rebirth, the Aztecs enacted the chilling festival known as Tlacaxipewalistli, which translates to the flaying of men. During this festival, victims were systematically killed and their skins were worn by priests. The purpose behind this gruesome ceremony remains one of history's most profound and deeply unsettling, unsolved mysteries. Archaeologists have unearthed ceremonial stones and ritual pits directly linked to these sacrifices. The most significant of these is the Flaying stone, or sacrificial altar. It was typically a large, flat, circular stone located at the base of the temple steps. This was the stage for the final act of the ritual, the execution and the initial flaying. Imagine this stone, slick with blood, serving as the literal workbench for the sacrifice. The stone itself stands as a silent, permanent record of a horrifying religious practice that defies modern comprehension. The process was disturbingly systematic. During the festival, victims, often prisoners of war or slaves, bought specifically for the rite, were first executed. This could happen in several ways, such as by archery, where they were shot with arrows until their blood soaked the ground, symbolizing life-giving rain. Another method was gladiatorial combat on a massive stone disc. Immediately following their execution, the bodies were taken to the Flaying stone. There, priests using razor-sharp obsidian knives would painstakingly remove the skin from the torso, arms, and legs, often leaving the hands and feet intact. The immense skill required to flay an entire human body this way suggests a highly specialized and practiced ritual profession. The central, unsolved horror of this ritual is what happened next: the wearing of the skin. Priests would immediately put on the still wet, pliable skins, wearing them for the entire 20-day duration of the festival. Over time, the skin would shrink, harden, and darken, turning into a gruesome, leather-like garment. The priests who wore these skins were seen as embodying the god Teutoburg himself, a living vessel bringing fertility and renewal to the land. But why the skin? Was it meant to be a literal transfer of life force from the victim to the community? Was it an act of profound, if terrifying, spiritual empathy? The deep theological motivation for this extreme ritual of spiritual transformation remains unsolved by modern anthropology. While the sacrifice was religious in nature, the selection of victims was deeply political, raising a major unsolved question about its true purpose. The victims were often high-ranking prisoners of war, particularly from the rival Tlaxcalan nation. Others were slaves purchased specifically for the ritual. This means the ceremony served multiple dark functions at once. Religiously, it fed Teutoburg to ensure a good harvest. Politically, it was a profound act of public humiliation and intimidation against rival states. Economically, it created a massive ongoing demand for sacrificial victims, which in turn drove the Aztec economy of warfare. The question is, was the primary motivation theological necessity, or was it a brutal tool for imperial control? The intertwining of fear and faith in this practice is a puzzle we have yet to solve. Archaeological discoveries have confirmed the sheer mind-boggling scale of this terror. Excavations near the Templo Mayor, the great temple of Tenochtitlan, have uncovered the remains of the Tzompantli, massive wooden racks used to publicly display the skulls of sacrificial victims. In 2017, a huge tower of human skulls was found, containing the remains of not just men, but also women and children. The systematic, large-scale execution needed to sustain both the Tzompantli and the Tlacaxi-Pehualistli rituals defies any simple explanation. It reinforces the image of a state obsessed with and organized around ritual death. The Flaying Festival was, without a doubt, an act of profound psychological warfare. The sight of priests walking through the city wearing human skin was one of the single most shocking things the Spanish conquistadors recorded in their chronicles. It communicated a level of spiritual commitment and brutality that was meant to be utterly intimidating, both to foreign invaders and to the local population subjugated by the Aztec Empire. The ritual served as a permanent, visceral reminder of the immense and terrifying power held by the Aztec priesthood and the state. It was a message written in blood and skin. Perhaps the biggest theological paradox of all is the unsolved benevolence of Teutoburg. He was widely loved and worshipped, not feared like some of the other war gods in the Aztec pantheon. His own flaying was seen as a gift to humanity, a profound act of self-sacrifice for their benefit. So how could a civilization reconcile the brutal, horrifying act of human flaying with a god whose ultimate identity was one of love, rebirth, and agricultural abundance? This central contradiction at the heart of Aztec faith remains a deeply unsolved mystery, a testament to a worldview vastly different from our own. The flaying stone and the rituals of Teutoburg stand as a horrifying testament to the extreme lengths a civilization will go to in order to ensure its spiritual and physical survival. We know the ritual was systematic and deeply important, but the ultimate reconciliation of its horror and its holiness remains locked in the silent, flayed skin of the past. Now we turn from a horror of ritualized bloodshed to one of the opposite extreme, a ritual defined by the mass burning of bodies, which may signal a lost prehistoric plague. This was a time of rich trade, intricate metalwork, and a society centered around the longhouse, a massive timber dwelling that was the heart, the hearth, and the history of every clan. But across Sweden and Denmark, archaeologists have found a chilling pattern. At numerous sites, these communal hearths weren't just abandoned. They were ritually destroyed by fire, sometimes with the remains of their inhabitants still inside. These are the Bronze Age burning houses, and they may be the first physical evidence of a prehistoric plague, a catastrophic disease outbreak that terrified ancient Europe. One of our biggest clues comes from a site near the famous Egtved girl burial in Denmark. While her burial was rich and celebrated, other contemporary sites nearby tell a story of communal catastrophe. Archaeologists have found many instances where longhouses weren't simply left to decay. Instead, they were purposefully demolished. The structure was systematically dismantled, valuable goods were removed, and then the entire site was set ablaze. This extreme organized act of destruction is the core of an ancient and deeply unsettling mystery. What could possibly motivate a community to burn its own home to the ground? Two main theories are hotly debated. The first is ritualized retirement. This idea suggests that when a house reached the end of its natural lifespan, burning it was a purification ritual. It was a way to release the structure's spirit or energy before building a new one on the same spot, essentially a ceremony to mark a new beginning. But the second theory is far more sinister: quarantine and containment. This theory proposes that the house was burned because it was infected. The inhabitants may have died rapidly from a contagious disease, and the community, gripped by fear, chose the fastest, most effective way they knew to eliminate the source of contamination: a ritual quarantine by fire. The archaeological evidence is split, leaving the true motive, a peaceful ritual or a desperate act of fear, completely unsolved. What pushes the evidence toward the more terrifying explanation is the discovery of human remains. In several of these burned longhouse sites, archaeologists have unearthed small, fragmented, and heavily burnt human bones mixed in with the foundations and floor deposits. These are not formal burials. The bones are scattered, suggesting that some individuals died inside the house and were never removed before it was set ablaze. This was a profound cultural taboo. To deny someone a proper burial was an act of extreme desperation, suggesting a community overwhelmed by fear. And the strongest argument for this containment theory is its link to prehistoric plague. Recent genetic studies on Bronze Age remains from across Europe have confirmed the existence of a highly virulent strain of Yersinia pestis, the very same bacterium responsible for the Black Death that was active during this exact era. The disease was likely passed along bustling trade networks, leading to rapid, catastrophic die-offs in the densely populated longhouses. The burning of the houses in this context becomes a desperate, organized response to an invisible and terrifying contagion, an early attempt at exorcism through incineration. Think about the implications. The decision to burn a longhouse wasn't made lightly. It represented a massive economic loss for the entire clan. Such an extreme command would have required a central authority, a powerful chief or a religious leader whose word was law. This suggests that the burning houses are evidence of a powerful, centralized social structure, one capable of enforcing such a traumatic and costly public health measure. The level of political organization required to coordinate this across different settlements is a significant unsolved social mystery in itself. And there's another layer to this mystery. In several cases, valuable bronze hoards, caches of axes, swords, and jewelry have been found deliberately buried near the burnt longhouses. This isn't random. It suggests that the community in its moment of crisis may have been offering a sacrificial gift of their greatest wealth to the earth or to their gods, desperately hoping to stop the spread of the disease or appease whatever spiritual forces they believed were at play. The combination of mass destruction, abandoned bodies, and wealth sacrifice paints a picture of an unsolved crisis of both faith and survival. Of course, the greatest challenge for archaeologists is distinguishing intent. From a purely physical standpoint, the evidence for an accidental fire, a ritual burning, and a quarantine burning can look identical: scorched earth, charcoal, and collapsed timbers. We have to rely on the contextual clues, the presence of fragmented human bone, the accompanying hoards of treasure, and the shocking lack of proper burial, to infer the extraordinary motive behind the destruction. The final answer remains just beyond the reach of physical evidence alone. But if the quarantine theory holds true, the burning houses of Scandinavia represent one of the world's first large-scale documented acts of public health crisis management. They are a physical record of prehistoric humanity's terrifying confrontation with an invisible microbial horror. A confrontation that required a level of organized fear and collective decision-making that completely reshapes our understanding of early European society. The Bronze Age burning houses remain a terrifying mystery. They may signal the devastating arrival of plague thousands of years before the Black Death reshaped the medieval world. We know the houses were burned, and we know lives were sacrificed. But what terrifying invisible force compelled these communities to destroy their own homes and dishonor their dead? The answer is locked away in the prehistoric genome, a silent witness to an ancient horror. Across the globe, we journey to the American Southwest, to the massive stone metropolises of Chaco Canyon, New Mexico. Between 850 and 1250 AD, the ancestral Puebloans built an astonishingly sophisticated culture known for its monumental architecture, advanced astronomy, and a vast network of roads. Their capital, Pueblo Bonito, was a vibrant center of spiritual and political power. Yet within this seemingly organized, complex society, archaeologists have unearthed evidence of a terrifying and controversial practice: the systematic processing of human remains that strongly suggests a unique form of ritualistic or consumption-based violence. The evidence for this extreme activity was first observed back in the 1960s, but it gained significant scientific weight through later excavations. Key sites like Mug House revealed shocking collections of human bones that were disarticulated, fractured, and scattered among the ruins. Critically, these bones weren't found in traditional, formal graves. Instead, they were discovered mixed in with discarded pottery shards, ash, and common animal refuse, tossed into refuse pits and hearths, which indicates they were treated like trash after some catastrophic event. Forensic archaeologist Christy Turner pioneered the definitive analysis, establishing criteria that remain the core of this investigation. The human bones she examined showed clear, undeniable evidence of systematic post-mortem alteration, consistent with being processed for consumption or extreme defleshing. This included abrasions on the ends of long bones, as if they'd been stirred or boiled in large ceramic pots. There were specific, uniform cut marks found near joints, indicating deliberate disarticulation and the removal of muscle tissue, identical to butchering marks found on large game animals. Long bones were deliberately fractured to access and extract the marrow, consistent with being bashed on a stone anvil. And finally, some bone fragments were found heavily scorched or charred, as if they were roasted or exposed directly to fire. This collection of forensic evidence, known as the Turner criteria, strongly suggests the bodies were butchered and processed using methods designed for food preparation. But the motive for this systematic processing is the most fiercely debated mystery of the Chaco culture. Was it ritualized terror? Some theories suggest the victims were members of rival groups or individuals who defied the established elite. The processing would have been an extreme form of public execution and intimidation, designed to shock and terrify the population into obedience. This theory, championed by Turner, proposes that horror was used as a deliberate tool of political control. Another possibility is survival. The practice might have occurred during severe periods of environmental stress, famine, or drought, as a desperate last resort measure. The Chaco region suffered cycles of extreme drought, making this a plausible, though terrifying, response to resource scarcity. A third theory suggests it was a form of post-mortem defleshing, where the remains were ritually processed after death, not for food but solely for ceremonial purposes, perhaps to cleanly remove the flesh to prepare the bones for display or a secondary burial. The context of these killings only deepens the mystery. The archaeological evidence for this intense processing is often found at sites that show other signs of extreme violence and conflict, usually around the time the Chaco system was collapsing between 1150 and 1250 AD. The victims were likely local Puebloan people, not foreign enemies. This suggests the horror was an internal catastrophe, a breakdown of social order or a political purge executed by a powerful ruling class to consolidate power. The identity of the perpetrators and their ultimate political motive remains unsolved. Then came the fecal evidence. The forensic case was significantly reinforced by the analysis of fossilized human feces or coprolites found at the site. These coprolites, analyzed by Dr. Richard Mahler, showed clear, unambiguous traces of human myoglobin, a protein only found in human muscle tissue. The presence of human tissue protein in the digestive systems of the inhabitants, combined with the butchery marks, provides some of the most disturbing scientific proof that human flesh was, indeed, consumed. The scientific confirmation of the act only heightens the terror of the unsolved motive behind it. The descendants of the Chaco people, the modern Pueblo tribes, maintain a powerful silence on this subject. Their oral traditions contain stories of a great evil that forced their ancestors to flee Chaco Canyon, a time of sorcery, chaos, and the failure of moral order. Many modern tribes believe the practice was introduced by a foreign evil group that infiltrated their society. The profound cultural shame surrounding the topic has created a deep mythological silence, making it almost impossible to correlate the archaeological facts with any written or spoken historical context. If the terror theory is correct, the primary purpose was not caloric sustenance. It was profound psychological annihilation. Processing a human body like an animal and including it in the diet is the ultimate act of defilement, designed to strip the victim of all dignity and create a state of absolute fear in the witnessing population. The act would have been a terrifying weapon of social control, used to enforce the power of a waning elite or to eliminate a perceived spiritual threat, ensuring compliance through ultimate terror. Disturbingly, the period of violence and systematic processing coincides directly with the sudden systematic abandonment of the massive Chaco Canyon sites. Thousands of people simply walked away from their magnificent stone cities, migrating south and east to found new settlements. Did the horror of the violence, the breakdown of the most fundamental societal taboos, become so pervasive that the remaining population simply chose to flee a poisoned land? The connection between this horror and the catastrophic mass abandonment is a central unsolved catastrophe. The Chaco Canyon sites are a chilling record of a terrifying cultural crisis. The scientific evidence confirms the horror of the systematic dismemberment and processing of the dead. But why this sophisticated, astronomical society resorted to the ultimate taboo remains a terrifying enigma of the American Southwest. The motive is locked in the ashes of their hearths. We now turn to a horror defined by the ultimate ritual of sacred annihilation. This civilization, known for its astronomical genius and stunning architecture, harbored a deep obsession with the underworld, a realm they called Xibalba. Their gateway to this terrifying dimension was the sacred Cenote, a massive natural limestone sinkhole. This was not just a well, it was a site of mass human sacrifice and a watery grave for immense treasures. The human tragedy and the political motives behind these chilling rituals remain one of the greatest unsolved mysteries of the ancient Americas. Join us as we descend into the dark heart of the Mayan world. The sacred Cenote is a near-perfect circle, about 60 meters wide and dropping 27 meters to the murky water below. For the Maya, this wasn't merely a geological feature. It was the literal mouth of the underworld, the home of the powerful rain god, Chac. When sacrifices were made, victims were cast into these cold, dark depths. They weren't just offerings to Chac in a desperate plea for rain and fertile lands. They were considered messengers to the gods, The cenote was a direct, terrifying link to an invisible world, making the act of throwing living people into its abyss a grim, almost inevitable ritual. It was a portal that demanded tribute, and the Maya were compelled to answer its call. The first major dives into the cenote during the 20th century, led by figures like Edward Herbert Thompson, uncovered a horrifying truth. The bottom was littered with human remains and unimaginable wealth. Thousands of artifacts were pulled from the muck: gold bells, intricate jade carvings, pottery, and weapons. But most disturbingly, the cenote held the skeletal remains of hundreds of individuals. These bodies weren't carefully laid to rest, they were simply tossed in. The problem for modern investigators is that the cenote's water is highly corrosive, and the impact of the fall destroyed crucial forensic context. This has turned each sacrifice into a chilling, unsolved puzzle, leaving us to wonder about the precise motive and date of each death. What forensic analysis has been possible reveals a deeply unsettling pattern. The majority of the sacrificial victims were children, particularly young boys and young adult males. The high number of young men suggests a potential political or military motive. Were they captured enemy warriors, paraded before being sacrificed, or perhaps youths from their own communities, offered up during times of extreme crisis? The sacrifice of children, however, is often seen as the ultimate offering, the purest and most valuable life one could give to the gods. But unlike the later Aztecs, the Maya left no detailed written records explaining their selection process for the cenote. The true identities of these victims and the reasons they were chosen remain profoundly and tragically unsolved. So, what drove this continuous centuries-long ritual of sacrifice? Two primary theories compete to explain the motive. The first is environmental desperation. The Yucatan Peninsula was prone to severe civilization-threatening droughts. In this view, the sacrifices were a desperate ultimate plea to the rain god Chac for life-giving water. The second theory points to political terror. The ruling elite of Chichén Itzá may have used the cenote for public displays of power, demonstrating their direct line to the gods. Executing enemy captives or even local dissidents in this sacred place would have been a powerful deterrent against rebellion. It's likely the truth is a dark combination of both, a chilling mix of religious fervor and cold, hard political control. The horror doesn't end with drowning. While the water's corrosive effects make a full forensic picture difficult, some of the recovered skulls and bones show clear evidence of mutilation. Some remains appear to have been dismembered before being thrown into the cenote. Others show signs of cranial modification and other ritualistic processing. This suggests the victims weren't simply thrown in to drown. They were subjected to complex and likely terrifying pre-sacrifice rituals. They were prepared and perhaps defiled before being offered to the underworld. The exact sequence of these final, horrific moments is another part of the cenote's puzzle that remains entirely unsolved. And it wasn't just human lives that were offered to Xibalba. The sacrifices were accompanied by an immense amount of material wealth. Divers have recovered priceless jade carvings and gold ornaments, some of which were imported from as far away as Costa Rica. Crucially, many of these precious items were deliberately broken or shattered before being thrown into the water. This act is known as ritual killing. By destroying the physical object, the Maya believed they were transferring its spiritual essence to the gods. The sheer volume of wealth destroyed in this manner highlights the extraordinary level of commitment the Maya had to this terrifying ritual, a commitment whose depths we still struggle to comprehend. One of the most frustrating aspects of this mystery is the silence of the Maya themselves. Their written records, preserved on stone monuments and in painted codices, are rich with astronomical data and royal histories. Yet they are cryptically silent about the specific details of the Cenote sacrifices. Unlike the Aztecs, who meticulously documented their sacrificial rituals, the Maya left no clear instructions or records explaining who was sacrificed, when, or why. The written history is missing the essential human context of the ritual. This absolute textual void is the main reason the motive behind the sacrifices at the sacred cenote remains so profoundly and stubbornly unsolved. What's truly fascinating is that the sacred cenote was used for sacrifices for centuries, continuing long after the great Mayan cities of the Classic period collapsed around 900 AD. This tells us the ritual was so fundamental to the region, its religious beliefs, that it outlasted the political structures that once supported it. Even as the grand temples and palaces fell into ruin, pilgrims and later rulers continued to travel to this sacred sinkhole to make their offerings. This fact points to a belief system so deep and primal that its ultimate unsolved motive lies at the very core of Mayan spirituality, independent of any single dynasty or city-state. The sacred cenote stands as a terrifying testament to a civilization's relationship with its underworld. Hundreds of lives and a fortune in treasure were consumed by its murky depths. But the final truth, was it religious desperation, a plea for rain in a parched land, or was it calculated political terror that compelled them to sacrifice their own youth and children? The answer remains locked away, guarded by the cold, black water of Xibalba. The water holds the truth, but it refuses to speak. Let's journey back to the heart of ancient Greece, to Athens, a city at the peak of its golden age, the very birthplace of democracy and philosophy. The year is 430 BC. The city is locked in a brutal conflict, the Peloponnesian War. Seeking safety, thousands of refugees have poured inside its massive defensive walls, creating dangerously crowded conditions. This overcrowding was a tinderbox waiting for a spark, and that spark came in the form of a devastating biological catastrophe: the Plague of Athens. What struck the city wasn't just a disease, it was an epidemiological enigma that would wipe out nearly a third of the population, including its celebrated leader, Pericles. To this day, it remains one of history's most terrifying and profound unsolved medical mysteries. The only reason we know the true horror of what happened is thanks to the historian Thucydides, who not only documented the plague, but survived it himself. His account is chillingly precise. It began with a sudden intense fever, bloodshot eyes, and a sore throat that bled. This was followed by violent vomiting, agonizing stomach cramps, and an unquenchable, desperate thirst. Within a week, most victims were dead. Thucydides notes that the disease was so aggressive that doctors were powerless against it, and many died just trying to help. Despair became so absolute that people simply gave up, with some even taking their own lives to escape the suffering. The plague didn't just attack the body, it shattered the human spirit, leading to a complete breakdown of social order. Religious devotion vanished, and lawlessness took over the streets. So, what was this terrifying killer? Despite Thucydides' detailed description, the medical identity of the Plague of Athens has never been solved. For centuries, Modern medical historians have debated dozens of possibilities: typhus, smallpox, measles, or even a form of hemorrhagic fever like Ebola. In 2006, a glimmer of hope appeared. DNA analysis of remains from a mass grave in Athens identified the presence of Salmonella enterica, the bacteria that causes typhoid fever. But there's a problem. The symptoms Thucydides described don't perfectly align with typhoid. This has led to more theories. Was it a combination of infections hitting a weakened population all at once? Was it a completely unknown pathogen that has since vanished? Or was it a radically mutated strain of a known disease? The lack of a definitive diagnosis makes the plague the single most important unsolved medical mystery of the ancient world. The social horror of the plague is permanently etched into the archaeological record. Excavations near the city walls have unearthed mass graves where bodies were dumped without ceremony. The dead were stacked haphazardly, sometimes barely covered with dirt. The sacred Greek rituals of proper funerals and cremation were completely abandoned. This utter lack of respect for the dead, a direct result of the overwhelming speed and scale of the death toll, is a stark confirmation of the social collapse that Thucydides described. It shows a society pushed so far beyond its limits that its most deeply held beliefs about life, death, and the afterlife simply crumbled under the weight of the catastrophe. The plague didn't just kill indiscriminately. It struck at the very heart of Athenian power, claiming the life of its most brilliant statesman, Pericles. His death plunged Athens into political chaos and led to a major unsolved political question. Was the plague a natural disaster, or was it an act of biological warfare? It's a controversial theory, but some have suggested that Sparta or its allies could have intentionally poisoned Athens' water or food supplies. While there is no direct historical evidence to support this claim, the sudden and devastating nature of the outbreak continues to fuel speculation about its origins. The question of whether the plague was a tragic accident of war or a deliberate act of terror remains a tantalizing and unsolved dimension of the mystery. Perhaps Thucydides' most chilling observation was the complete moral implosion the plague triggered. As the bodies piled up, people saw that piety offered no protection. The righteous died just as quickly as the wicked. As he wrote, no one was restrained by fear of God or law of man. With the future so uncertain, people began to live only for the moment. They seized property, indulged in forbidden pleasures, and abandoned all sense of duty, believing they wouldn't live long enough to face judgment or punishment. This wasn't just a medical crisis. It was a profound moral and social catastrophe that rotted the foundations of Athenian democracy from within, creating a society driven by fear and nihilism. So where did this nightmare come from? Thucydides gives us a clue, stating the plague originated in Ethiopia, which in ancient Greek terms could mean a vast area of sub-Saharan Africa. From there, he says it traveled through Egypt and Libya before arriving by ship at Athens' bustling port, Piraeus. The fact that the disease was a foreign import, traveling over incredible distances via ancient trade routes, presents yet another unsolved puzzle. What kind of pathogen could be so virulent, survive such a long journey, and then erupt with such explosive force in a new population? This suggests a germ with an extreme capacity for transmission and survival, the likes of which we still struggle to understand today. Beyond the physical suffering, the psychological horror was immense. Thucydides noted that the heaviest emotional toll fell on those who tried to help. Doctors, caregivers, and family members died at the highest rates, proving that simple compassion was a death sentence. This created an atmosphere of pure terror. People began to abandon their sick loved ones, leaving them to die alone in their homes or in the streets. Imagine the unbearable fear of knowing that to care for your own child or parent was to sign your own death warrant. This psychological torment, the conflict between love and self-preservation, is a testament to the disease's terrifying power to strip away our very humanity. Just when the Athenians thought the worst was over, the plague revealed another cruel twist. The first wave struck in 430 BC and was utterly devastating. Then it seemed to subside. For a brief period, there was hope, but that hope was crushed when the plague returned with a vengeance 2 years later, in 428 BC. This recurrence raises another unsolved mystery, the mystery of immunity. Did survivors of the first wave only gain temporary protection, or was the second outbreak caused by a new mutated strain of the same pathogen? This two-stage assault prolonged the city's agony, drained its resources, and ultimately sealed its defeat in the war against Sparta. The Athenian plague remains a haunting, unsolved chapter of our past that forever altered the course of Western history. The horror was real, and its consequences were catastrophic. But the true identity of the killer pathogen remains a secret, locked away in the dust of those ancient mass graves. The story of Athens is a chilling reminder of how fragile civilization can be in the face of an invisible enemy. Now we turn from a horror that attacked the body from within to a ritual that dismantled it from without. We journey to the desert coast of northern Peru, home of the Moche civilization, a powerful pre-Inca culture that flourished between 100 AD and 800 AD. The Moche were master ceramists and metallurgists, but their religious life was defined by a terrifying, dark preoccupation with ritual combat and specialized human offerings. Their most infamous archaeological sites, particularly those at the Huaca de la Luna, or the Pyramid of the Moon, revealed a systematic, chilling pattern of mass execution that remains one of the most profound and unsolved religious horrors of the ancient world. Excavations at the base of the Huaca de la Luna revealed a terrifying truth. The pyramid was not only a religious structure, but also a site of systematic, mass human execution. Archaeologists uncovered multiple layers of mass burials, with hundreds of victims deposited over time, often after periods of torrential rains. The sheer scale of death and the forensic evidence left on their bones suggested a ritualized process of political execution and ceremonial post-mortem treatment that was absolutely central to Moche spiritual governance. Forensic analysis revealed a distinct, consistent profile for the victims. They were almost exclusively young males, overwhelmingly in their late teens and early 20s, with strong muscular physiques. Crucially, many of the skeletons showed evidence of healed injuries, old fractures and battle wounds, suggesting they were captured warriors or elite combatants who had survived previous Moche ritual battles. The offerings were not random. They were a systematic disposal of high-value political or spiritual opponents, ensuring the removal of threats to the elite. The victims did not die quickly. Their skeletons showed clear signs of having been stripped naked, restrained, and subjected to prolonged, deliberate ritual processing before execution. Some bones showed clear evidence of ceremonial alteration or disarticulation, the removal of specific appendages. The sequence of events, which has been documented on Moche art, confirmed that victims were systematically marched up the pyramid and subjected to a final definitive ritual. This methodical, controlled horror is entirely unsolved by any textual context. The core unsolved motive is what we call the cosmic obligation ritual. Moche ceramic art depicts a final, structured act of offering, often linked to the decapitator god deity. A ritual specialist or high priest collected the result of the final sacrifice in a ceremonial cup, which was then presented publicly. The Moche believed this offering was the ultimate source of spiritual power, essential for feeding the gods and ensuring the cosmic order, that the sun would rise and the seasons would turn. Was this public presentation symbolic of renewal, or was it the literal theological necessity required to avert disaster? The lack of definitive historical text leaves the ultimate necessity of this offering fundamentally unsolved. The mass sacrifices often coincided with periods of extreme environmental catastrophe, massive El Niño flooding events and subsequent droughts. These natural disasters would have decimated the Moche agricultural system and threatened their very existence. The offerings, therefore, may have been a desperate, massive plea to the spiritual world to stop the floods and restore order. The Moche religion required the ultimate offering during the ultimate crisis, reinforcing the unsolved question: was the motive religious fervor or social desperation? Forensic examination of the ankle and wrist bones revealed clear evidence of damage consistent with tight, sustained binding by rope or cord, proof that the victims were completely restrained for a significant period before their deaths. This deliberate, organized restraint confirms the executions were ritualistic, not spontaneous acts of violence. The physical proof of captivity and terror only heightens the need to solve the precise theological or political motive. The Moche sacrifices were a massive public display, confirming the power of the ruling political religious elite. The priests, often depicted as the primary participants in the final rituals, used the terror of the offerings to enforce their own spiritual and political dominance over the population. The fear of ending up on the sacrifice platform was a powerful tool of social control. The unsolved question of the precise balance of power between the religious and military aspects of the sacrifice remains open. The only textual evidence we have is the stunning, hyper-realistic narrative found on Moche ceramic vessels. These pots depict the entire sequence: the ritual combat, the humiliation of the defeated, the binding, and the final offering. While these visuals confirm the sequence of the ritual terror, they do not explain the ultimate theological necessity behind the act, the why. The visual record is terrifyingly complete, but the spiritual meaning is entirely unsolved. The Moche sacrifices are a chilling testament to a civilization driven by the fear of environmental collapse and the belief that only the purest, most systematic offerings could save them. We know the ritual was systematic, but the final truth, the theological motive for the ultimate offering, remains locked in the sun-baked desert. We now turn to a modern horror defined by a ritual of the opposite extreme, a horrifying act of collective self-destruction and mass burial. Today we venture deep into the remote jungles of Guyana, to the year 1978, to uncover a modern horror. This is the story of Jonestown, a settlement founded by the American cult, the People's Temple, and its charismatic delusional leader, Jim Jones. What was promised as a socialist paradise, a utopia far from the world's troubles, rapidly twisted into a controlled, isolated community. This devolution would culminate in a horrifying tragedy, the single largest non-natural loss of American civilian life before 9/11. It remains a profound psychological and political mystery, a story of control, fear, and a promise that turned into a nightmare. On November 18, 1978, after a violent clash with an outside delegation, Jim Jones gathered his entire congregation. In the main pavilion, he ordered them to perform a final collective act he called revolutionary suicide. A large vat of flavored drink was prepared, but this was no ordinary beverage. It was laced with a lethal cocktail of a rapid-acting chemical agent and powerful sedatives. The horror began with the youngest members of the community. Children were administered the poison first, sometimes forcibly by people they trusted. Over the next few hours, in a terrifying systematic sequence of forced compliance and tragedy, 918 people died, including over 300 children. The most haunting question of Jonestown is, why? Was this an act of profound, unwavering faith? The culmination of years of intense psychological conditioning where followers willingly chose to die for their leader? Or was it mass murder, an act of sheer terror where the vast majority were coerced by Jones's armed security guards, his Red Brigade? The physical evidence is tragically ambiguous. Some bodies were found in positions suggesting a calm, almost serene acceptance. Others showed clear signs of struggle, of a desperate final resistance. The true balance between consent and coercion is a mystery that forensic experts and psychologists still debate to this day. The sheer scale of the event was overwhelming. With 918 dead, the logistical and investigative crisis was immense. Official records and the process of identifying the bodies were chaotic and rushed. Aerial photos revealed a chilling scene, hundreds of bodies lying face down side by side, a testament to a highly organized, systematic process. But this organization doesn't answer the core question. The forensic ambiguity surrounding how each person died means the exact count of those who were forced versus those who participated willingly remains an official, statistical unknown. It's a dark number at the heart of this tragedy. The killing agent was primarily cyanide, but the method was more clinical than just poison. The protocol included the strategic use of Valium, chloral hydrate, and phenergan. This wasn't just about killing, it was about control. These sedatives were meant to subdue the victims, to minimize panic and struggle, ensuring a more compliant and orderly outcome. The most disturbing part: trusted medical personnel, nurses from within the community, were actively involved in preparing and administering this lethal cocktail, especially to the children. It was an ultimate betrayal of their professional and human ethics. The precise pharmaceutical recipe and the cold, calculated rationale behind it remain a chilling, unsolved part of the final, horrifying hour. Beyond the immediate horror, a persistent political theory emerged. Was the People's Temple just a radical socialist group, or was something more sinister at play? Was Jim Jones being secretly funded or manipulated by the CIA or other intelligence agencies? This theory gains traction from the lack of clear financial records, the surprisingly sophisticated surveillance and security at Jonestown, and the immense political influence Jones wielded before his downfall. The theory suggests Jonestown might have been some kind of unmonitored experiment in social engineering or psychological manipulation that spiraled catastrophically out of control. While definitive proof is missing, This external influence theory remains a powerful and unsettling conspiracy narrative. And what of the leader himself? Jim Jones was found dead with a gunshot wound to his head. The official ruling was suicide. But this simple explanation is clouded by doubt. Jones was heavily reliant on his most trusted security aides for everything. The idea of him carrying out a final, unassisted act seems questionable. Did he pull the trigger himself, or was he killed by a member of his inner circle as a final act of obedience or even mercy? The exact circumstances of his death, the moment the ultimate puppet master's strings were cut, remain officially unsolved. Our most direct window into this tragedy is the infamous death tape, a 44-minute audio recording made during those final desperate moments. On it, you can hear Jones relentlessly urging his followers to drink the poison, warning them of an impending apocalypse and orchestrating the entire event. The audio is terrifying proof of his psychological coercion and manipulation. Yet, as the tape nears its end, amidst sounds of distress and final surrender, the question of individual free will remains. Was anyone still making a choice? It is the chilling sound of absolute psychological control being exerted in real time. While 918 people died, a small number survived. They either outright refused to participate or managed to escape into the dense surrounding jungle. Their testimonies are crucial, but they are also often contradictory. They paint a picture of chaos, fear, and confusion. Because there is no single, unifying account of what happened in that pavilion, the precise breakdown of who chose to die and who was forced will likely remain forever lost to history. The horror of the event consumed the very evidence needed for final clarity. The Jonestown tragedy stands as a chilling modern horror, a case of extreme psychological terror, political paranoia, and systemic destruction, all disguised as spiritual devotion. The ultimate question of how one man achieved such catastrophic, lethal control over nearly 1,000 people remains one of the darkest, most disturbing psychological mysteries of the 20th century. It's a stark reminder of the dangers of surrendering one's will. We journey back to the heart of the Aztec Empire, a civilization where religious belief demanded human sacrifice on an absolute, terrifying scale. Rising above the capital of Tenochtitlan stood the Templo Mayor, the Great Temple. This was the spiritual and political center of the empire, a massive double pyramid dedicated to Huitzilopochtli, the god of war, and Tlaloc, the god of rain. Excavations at its base have uncovered ritual pits and burial sites that confirm the full, horrifying reality of Aztec ritual, the systematic removal of the human heart. The sheer scale and finality of this act leave us with a profound, unsolved question of theological necessity. Archaeologists have found numerous offering boxes and sacrificial stones linked to the temple's 2 shrines. Both archaeological finds and Spanish accounts confirm that the main ritual took place on a massive, convex sacrificial stone at the pyramid's summit. Here, a victim would be stretched over the stone, and a priest, using a sharp obsidian knife, would quickly cut beneath the ribcage. The human heart was then ripped out, often still beating, and offered to the gods. The stone itself is a silent, permanent record of this horrifying religious practice. So who were the victims of the Templo Mayor? They were a diverse yet politically significant group. They included warriors captured from rival states like the Tlaxcalans, slaves purchased specifically for the ritual, and even children who were primarily sacrificed to the rain god Tlaloc. The overwhelming scale suggests this was a deliberate, ongoing political ledger, a public accounting of imperial dominance. Victims were killed, often by blunt force or having their hearts removed, and their bodies were frequently mutilated before disposal. The sheer volume of death, with thousands of victims over centuries, drives the unsolved question of how and why this practice was deemed necessary and sustainable. The core unsolved motive lies in Aztec religious belief. They believed the world was created through divine sacrifice, leaving the universe in a state of perpetual debt. To prevent the sun god Huitzilopochtli from running out of energy and plunging the world into eternal darkness, the Aztecs had to feed him the most precious substance imaginable: human hearts and blood. This wasn't just worship, it was a cosmic necessity. The terror of the ritual was fueled by the absolute conviction that if the sacrifices stopped, the world itself would end. Archaeological excavations have unearthed massive offering pits near the temple, confirming the staggering scale of the sacrifices. These pits contain thousands of disarticulated human bones, mixed with ritual artifacts and effigies. Crucially, the sternums and ribs of many victims show clear surgical-like cuts, consistent with the act of opening the chest to remove the heart. This physical evidence proves the truth of the Spanish accounts and reveals the terrifyingly systematic nature of the heart removal ritual. The terror was then put on public display. The Tzompantli was a massive wooden rack used to exhibit the skulls of sacrificial victims. In 2017, a huge tower of human skulls was discovered, containing the remains of men, women, and children. The skulls were prepared by drilling holes through the temples and stringing them onto wooden poles. This public display of thousands of skulls served as a constant, visceral reminder of the gods' terrifying hunger and the state's absolute power. The logistics required to sustain this volume of sacrifice remain a puzzle for modern sociologists. The Templo Mayor itself embodies the central unsolved contradiction of Aztec faith. The temple was divided. One side was dedicated to the terrifying war god, who demanded hearts, while the other was dedicated to the benevolent rain god, who required offerings of water and life. Sacrifices were performed for both, reinforcing the idea that life and death, creation and destruction, were two halves of the same cosmic cycle. The human heart was the ultimate offering that fueled them both. This ritual was also a profound act of psychological warfare used to maintain imperial control. Imagine being a Spanish conquistador, staring in stunned horror at this ceremony. The sight of thousands of hearts being offered and skulls being displayed was designed to be utterly intimidating to both conquered rivals, like the Tlaxcalans, and the common Aztec population. This constant, visible terror was a weapon used to enforce obedience and prevent dissent, making the Templo Mayor a spiritual and political engine of fear. But what happened to the bodies? The Spanish accounts, though biased, claim that after the heart was removed, the victim's body was often tossed down the temple steps. There, it was dismembered, and the limbs were given to the elite for a ritualistic meal. While the forensic evidence for systematic heart removal is strong, the evidence for widespread post-sacrifice cannibalism is highly debated and largely unsolved. However, the removal of the heart and the subsequent defilement of the body were clearly a central, terrifying part of the political and religious message. The Templo Mayor sacrifices are a terrifying monument to a civilization driven by the fear of cosmic collapse and a profound religious debt. We know thousands died to feed the sun, but the full truth of the theological necessity and the political use of this terror remains locked in the dust of the temple pits. Now we turn to a horror of the ultimate taboo, a ritual that involved the systematic removal of flesh and organs. We journey now to the rugged coastline of the Pacific Northwest, a land of massive cedar forests and rich salmon fishing. For thousands of years, prehistoric tribes thrived here, building complex societies. Yet, in the quiet mud of an ancient village site known as Namu in British Columbia, archaeologists uncovered something truly disturbing. They found evidence of extreme premeditated violence and a pattern of processing human remains that suggests a catastrophic social event. The horror found here challenges the romanticized narrative of a peaceful, pre-contact coastal life and remains a profound, unsolved mystery. Excavations in the late 20th century revealed a shocking scene. Inside the ruins of ancient longhouses and refuse pits, archaeologists found collections of human bones. These were not formal burials. They were disarticulated, fractured, and scattered, mixed in with discarded animal bones, ash, and cooking debris. In essence, they were treated like everyday domestic waste. The site's age places this event squarely in the prehistoric period, long before European contact, suggesting a terrifying breakdown in the most fundamental cultural norms. What makes this discovery so definitive is the forensic evidence. Forensic archaeologist Dr. Andrew Schulting pioneered the analysis, confirming a pattern of deliberate post-mortem trauma. The human bones showed clear, undeniable evidence of systematic manipulation, identical to the marks found on butchered animal carcasses. There were specific, precise cut marks near the joints, indicating deliberate disarticulation and defleshing. The ends of long bones, like the femur, were deliberately fractured to access the marrow, consistent with being bashed open on a stone anvil. Skulls showed percussion marks and were deliberately broken to access the tissue inside. This collection of evidence confirms the bodies were systematically butchered and, in some cases, subjected to fire, a finding that defies any typical funerary practice. The motive for this systematic processing is the single most fiercely debated mystery of the site. Was it ritual vengeance? In this theory, the victims were members of a rival tribe captured during a conflict. The processing was the ultimate act of ritualistic annihilation designed to strip the enemy of their spiritual dignity and instill terror in anyone who survived. The act was symbolic and political, or was it a case of desperate survival? Perhaps the community was facing extreme environmental stress, a famine or mass sickness, and this was a last resort measure to stay alive. A third theory suggests it was a form of ritual defleshing, where the remains were processed after death simply to prepare the bones for a secondary burial. However, the evidence of fire complicates this, but doesn't entirely rule it out. A crucial unsolved question is the identity of the victims. Were they local inhabitants consumed during a famine or a political purge, or were they captured enemies from a distant village? Isotope analysis, which can trace a person's diet and geographical origin, is often ambiguous for coastal tribes because their diets were so similar. If the victims were local, the site documents a horrifying internal catastrophe. If they were enemies, it's a record of prehistoric ritual warfare. Without a definitive biological key, the true identity of these individuals remains fundamentally unknown. The presence of charred and thermally altered bone fragments mixed with cooking debris provides definitive evidence that heat was intentionally applied. Some of the human bones were clearly exposed to fire, indicating that the flesh was cooked. This intentional use of heat, combined with the systematic cut marks, elevates the evidence far beyond simple ritual defleshing. The scientific confirmation of this thermal alteration strengthens the theory of consumption or some form of extreme ritual, but it still doesn't solve the underlying motive. Like other sites of extreme ancient violence, this event is surrounded by a deep mythological silence. The oral traditions of modern coastal tribes speak of dark times and terrifying primal acts that were eventually suppressed and forbidden. The extreme cultural taboo surrounding such acts means that no clear, explicit historical context exists to explain the findings at Namu. The cultural prohibition against even discussing it ensures that the real reason remains permanently shielded by mythology and social shame. The systematic nature of the processing suggests this was an organized, politically enforced decision. This wasn't a disorganized riot. It required a knowledge of anatomy and a cultural green light to proceed. The horror points to a political system capable of overriding the most fundamental societal taboos. This suggests a period of crisis so extreme that the normal rules of society either completely collapsed or were deliberately subverted by a powerful, desperate elite, making the motive one of political urgency. But here lies the greatest contradiction: the environment itself. The Pacific Northwest coast was one of the richest, most resource-abundant environments on Earth, capable of sustaining massive populations with its salmon, cedar, and other natural wealth. This makes the possibility of a simple, famine-driven survival scenario highly unlikely. The fact that such an extreme act took place in a land of plenty strongly suggests the motive was ritualistic, political, or punitive, driven by psychological terror rather than mere starvation. The Namu site is a chilling window into the primal darkness of prehistoric North America. The scientific evidence confirms the horror of the systematic defleshing and thermal processing of the dead. But why this resourceful coastal people committed this extreme act remains a terrifying enigma, its secrets locked in the communal ash. We now turn from one mystery of ancient violence to another, an event that represents the ultimate political execution. We journey now into the dark, rain-soaked forests of ancient Germany, where two worlds collided with terrifying force: the disciplined might of the Roman Empire and the fierce, so-called savage Germanic tribes. The year is 9 AD. 3 entire Roman legions, nearly 20,000 soldiers commanded by Publius Quinctilius Varus, are marching through the dense, unforgiving terrain of the Teutoburg region. But this was no ordinary march. They were being led into a trap, a deadly ambush orchestrated by the Germanic chieftain Arminius, a man the Romans themselves had trained. What followed was a 3-day nightmare of slaughter that completely annihilated the Roman force. It was one of the greatest military disasters in Rome's history, a defeat so profound it permanently etched the Rhine River as the boundary of the empire. The horror of those 3 lost legions has echoed through time, a profound military and archaeological mystery. For centuries, the exact location of this monumental battle was lost to history, becoming the stuff of myth and legend. Then, in the 1980s, a breakthrough. An amateur archaeologist exploring with his metal detector near a hill called Kalkreis in northern Germany stumbled upon a cache of Roman coins and artifacts. This single discovery unlocked the door to a shocking truth. Subsequent excavations unearthed overwhelming evidence. This was the site of the annihilation. Thousands of Roman coins, fragments of weapons, pieces of their iconic segmented armor, and countless personal items were found scattered across a vast 25 square kilometer area, gruesomely mixed with the fragmented remains of men and horses. The myth had become a chilling reality. The sheer inventory of finds paints a forensic picture of a brutal, organized slaughter. Archaeologists have been able to identify 3 distinct phases of the battle from the evidence left behind. An initial, shocking skirmish, followed by a full-scale rout as the Romans tried to escape, and finally, a desperate last stand. The discovery of around 2,500 Roman coins is staggering, but it's the more than 100 slingshot projectiles, a favored weapon of the Germanic forces, that provides tangible proof of the ambush's scale. And most grimly, the discovery of mass burial pits confirms the horrific casualty count and tells a later part of the story. A hurried, somber burial of the Roman dead by a recovery force that arrived years after the fact. But perhaps the most profound and unsolved military horror of the battle is the fate of the 3 lost eagle standards, the aquili. These magnificent bronze eagles were the sacred emblems of the 17th, 18th, and 19th legions. To lose an eagle was the ultimate shame, a spiritual and military disgrace for any Roman legion. History tells us that the Romans, in later campaigns, managed to recover 2 of the 3 lost standards, but the fate and final resting place of the 3rd eagle remain completely unknown. This single military object is one of the most sought-after archaeological prizes in the world, a haunting symbol of the utter shame and finality of this defeat. The horror didn't end with death. Forensic examination of the skeletons recovered from Calcrease reveals evidence of post-mortem mutilation, adding a layer of ritualistic terror to the slaughter. It seems the Germanic tribes, driven by vengeance and ancient customs, defiled the bodies of their fallen enemies. Skulls have been found with marks consistent with scalping, and bodies were often dismembered, perhaps for public display as a warning. The Roman historian Tacitus wrote that the Germanic warriors even built altars in the forest, where they sacrificed captured Roman centurions to their gods. This suggests the battle culminated not just in a massacre, but in a terrifying, unsolved ritual of human sacrifice. And who were the men who died here? While we know the numbers of the legions involved, the true human identity of the victims is largely lost to time. The Roman legions were a melting pot, made up of men from all corners of the sprawling empire. From Hispania, Gaul, and Italy, the thousands who perished in this forest vanished from the historical record, leaving behind only their fragmented bones and broken armor. The staggering scale of the death, combined with the secrecy later imposed by Rome, the Emperor Augustus himself famously cried, "Varus, give me back my legions," ensures that the individual stories of these 20,000 lost souls remain a completely unsolved human tragedy. The archaeological evidence vividly confirms the desperation of those final chaotic days. In certain areas of the battlefield, there are massively compacted layers of weapons and armor. This suggests 2 possibilities. Either the Romans were frantically trying to shed their heavy gear to move faster through the mud and forests, or they were forced into such tight, chaotic formations that their equipment was literally trampled into the earth as they fell. The discovery of large amounts of cavalry equipment near the very end of the battlefield trail points to a final, desperate attempt by Roman officers to break out of the ambush, an attempt that failed utterly. The forensic evidence is clear. This was a complete, systematic annihilation of a Roman military machine. The ultimate horror, however, is political. It lies in the treachery of Arminius. A chieftain of the Cherusci tribe, Arminius had served in the Roman military, learned its ways, and had even been granted Roman citizenship. He used his intimate knowledge of Roman tactics, of their marching order, and most critically his commander Varus's complete trust to lead the legions directly into the kill zone. This single act of betrayal didn't just destroy an army, it changed the course of European history, preserving the Germanic heartland from Roman conquest. It remains a terrifying, unsolved lesson in political failure, a complete breakdown of Roman intelligence, and a devastating misplacement of trust. Years later, a Roman recovery mission led by the general Germanicus finally reached the battlefield. The scene that greeted them, as described by Tacitus, was utterly gruesome. Fields of bleached bones, scattered weapons, and the grim remnants of the Germanic sacrificial altars. The soldiers gave their fallen comrades a hurried burial and, as we know, recovered 2 of the 3 lost eagles. After this somber mission, the official Roman policy became one of complete silence. The disaster was too great, the shame too deep. The site was abandoned, and the history of the defeat was intentionally suppressed, ensuring the battle's true horrors remained unsolved for nearly 2 millennia. The Teutoburg Forest stands today as a terrifying monument to imperial ambition, cold-blooded betrayal, and mass military annihilation. The sheer scale of the slaughter and the systematic destruction of 3 legions are sealed in the dark German earth. We know how they died, but the final resting place of the ultimate symbol of their shame, the Third Eagle Standard, remains one of history's greatest unsolved mysteries. From the horror of a legion's shame, we now turn to a different kind of terror, a terrifying act of collective self-mutilation and ritualistic suicide. We journey to the arid landscape of the Judean desert, to the isolated, flat-topped fortress of Masada. This natural stronghold, rebuilt and fortified by Herod the Great, became the final sanctuary for a group of Jewish rebels, the Zealots, who refused to surrender to the Roman army during the First Jewish-Roman War. In 73 AD, facing certain defeat and enslavement, the Zealots chose an extreme, desperate act of collective self-destruction. This act remains one of the most powerful and unsolved ethical and historical mysteries of the ancient world. The Siege of Masada was the final, brutal chapter of the Jewish revolt. The Roman army, led by Commander Flavius Silva, surrounded the fortress, building a massive circumvallation wall to cut off any escape. To breach the fortress itself, the Romans undertook a monumental feat of engineering, a huge siege ramp built of packed earth and stone crawling its way up the side of the cliff. The nearly year-long siege culminated when the Romans finally broke through the walls. But when they entered the fortress, they weren't met with resistance. They found a chilling, unnatural silence. Our primary and highly controversial source for what happened is the Jewish historian Flavius Josephus, a former rebel commander who had defected to the Romans. He recounts that the zealot leader, Eleazar ben Yair, delivered 2 powerful, persuasive speeches, arguing that death in freedom was far preferable to a life of Roman slavery. Convinced, the Zealots then destroyed their vast food stores, not because they were starving, but to show their act was one of principle. Then they began the systematic process of killing themselves. According to Josephus, men killed their own wives and children. Then 10 men were chosen by lot to kill the remaining fighters. Finally, one of those 10 killed the other 9 and then took his own life. Josephus claims that 960 men, women and children died in this ultimate act of defiance. Archaeological excavations led by the famed Yigael Yadin in the 1960s largely seem to corroborate Josephus's narrative. Archaeologists found the remains of the storerooms deliberately destroyed by fire. They found ritual baths, suggesting religious observance right up to the end. And crucially, they found the skeletal remains of approximately 28 individuals. While this is a small number compared to the 960 reported, the remains were consistent with the historical period. They also found 3 distinct braided hair cuttings and fragments of clothing, which could have been part of a final ritual. This physical evidence, though sparse, points strongly to a deliberate, organized final act of desperation. But here is where we hit the core, unsolved archaeological problem. The numbers just don't match. Josephus reports 960 dead. Archaeologists found only 28 sets of human remains. Where are the other 932 bodies? This massive discrepancy has led to 2 competing and as yet unsolved theories. Theory A is that the mass suicide happened exactly as Josephus described. His account is largely true, but the vast majority of the bodies were either successfully burned by the zealots themselves, or they were scattered and desecrated by the Roman soldiers after the siege, leaving behind very few forensic traces for modern archaeologists to find. Theory B suggests a historical exaggeration. In this version, Josephus, writing for a Roman audience, inflated the number to glorify the scale of the Roman victory and perhaps to demonize the Jewish rebels as fanatics. The event was a real, but much smaller, more chaotic act of resistance, not the highly organized mass suicide of nearly 1,000 people. Because of this massive numerical contradiction, the true scale of the tragedy at Masada remains profoundly unsolved. Beyond the numbers, the event poses a terrifying, unsolved ethical and theological question. Was Masada an act of heroic, collective suicide, or was it a series of coordinated murders? According to Jewish law, suicide is strictly forbidden. The zealots seem to have found a loophole, a way to circumvent this taboo by having a chosen few execute the majority. This act, driven by a desperate desire for freedom, remains a profound moral and theological debate. Did they die as heroes, choosing their own fate, or were they victims of a calculated extreme act of collective despair? Adding a powerful piece of evidence to the story, Yadin's team found something incredible. In a storage room, they discovered 11 small inscribed pottery shards, known as ostraka. This number is tantalizingly close to the 10 executioners and the one final man chosen to kill them. One shard was even inscribed with the name Ben Yair, Eleazar's family name. While this is circumstantial, it provides powerful physical evidence that a final selection ritual, the drawing of lots to choose the executioners, likely took place. It confirms the methodical, organized nature of the final act, just as Josephus described. Can you imagine the psychological horror of that final night? The residents of Masada had to listen to their leader argue passionately for death over slavery. Then they had to watch their friends and family members carry out the executions. The final decision was driven by the very real fear of what Roman conquest meant. The women would be brutally assaulted, the children would be sold into slavery, and the men would be tortured for sport. The choice they faced was between a death of honor and a life of utter degradation. This terrifying final choice, recorded in the harrowing speeches Josephus attributes to Eleazar, is the core of the unsolved psychological motive behind the tragedy. Josephus recounts that when the Romans finally breached the walls, they were met with that complete, shocking silence. They discovered 2 women and 5 children who had successfully hidden themselves and survived the ordeal. It was they who recounted the horrific events to the Roman soldiers. The Roman reaction was reportedly not one of triumph, but of awe and even fear at the sheer unbending tenacity of the Jewish resolve. The silence of Masada was a political message, the ultimate refusal to be conquered. Masada stands today as a powerful, terrifying symbol of final defiance. It's a story of mass death that remains archaeologically sparse and ethically complex. We know an organized tragedy occurred on that mountaintop, but the true scale of the event and the moral justification for that final, terrible choice are locked away in the dust of the Judean desert. We journey now to the Roman Empire, but not to the grand forums or colosseums of Rome. Instead, we find ourselves in the seemingly peaceful English countryside of Devon in the remote province of Britannia. For centuries, this land held a dark secret. The Roman occupation is often remembered for its order, law, and engineering marvels. Yet, in 2010, an archaeological dig in an ordinary field at a place called Ipplepen unearthed a chilling pattern. This discovery hints at a persistent, systematic horror that lurked beneath the surface of the Romanized world. The ritualistic disposal of infants in domestic wells. The disturbing pattern found here is not unique. It echoes similar finds across the entire Roman Empire, pointing to a profound and unsolved social mystery. Archaeologists were initially excavating what they thought was a simple Roman-era settlement. They began to uncover a series of deep pits and wells, originally used for water and household refuse. As they sifted through the layers of debris, broken pottery, animal bones, and everyday waste, they started finding something else. Mixed in with the trash were the tiny, fragile bones of human infants. It wasn't a single tragic case. The discovery was repeated, pit after pit, well after well. The bones were scattered and disarticulated, a clear sign that these babies were not given a formal, respectful burial. Instead, they had been systematically discarded, thrown away with the common household garbage. Forensic analysis of these tiny remains painted a terrifyingly consistent picture. The overwhelming majority of the victims were newborns, many less than a few days old, some perhaps only hours. This immediate disposal of neonates is a strong indicator of systematic infanticide. While Roman law technically permitted a father to decide the fate of a newborn, the method of burial was a deep cultural taboo. Disposing of a body in a well or a refuse pit was an act reserved for the unwanted, the disgraced, or the ritually unclean. The sheer number of remains found at Ipplepen suggests this was not an isolated event, but a common, horrifying practice that persisted throughout the life of the settlement. But why? What could possibly motivate this? This is the central, unsolved mystery of Ipplepen. The leading theories are chilling. Was it an act of shame? Many believe the victims were the result of illicit pregnancies from adultery, rape, or relationships involving female slaves. Disposing of the child was a desperate attempt to protect the family's honor or the slave owner's reputation. The wells, in this scenario, were used to ritually cleanse the site of this perceived shame. Or was it a grim economic calculation? Perhaps overwhelming poverty or the inability to feed another mouth led to this terrible choice. The children were simply deemed economically unviable. Some archaeologists also point to gender selection, as other Roman sites have shown a bias towards the disposal of female infants, though the evidence for this at Ipplepen is less conclusive. The choice of disposal site is a crucial and terrifying clue. Wells weren't just holes in the ground, they held ritual importance in Roman society, often seen as gateways to the underworld or boundaries between worlds. To throw a body into a community's water source was a deliberate and profound act of defilement. It was a form of unburial, a desecration intended to completely erase the child from social memory, as if they never existed. The shocking contrast between the tiny, fragile body and the deep, dark well only amplifies the horror of the act. It was a statement. This child was not only unwanted, but they were to be forgotten. The legal context makes this even more disturbing. Roman law famously granted the head of the household, the pater familias, a power known as patria potestas. This gave him the legal right of life and death over his children, including the choice to raise a newborn or to expose it, which meant leaving it to die. So while infanticide was legally permissible, the secretive, shameful method of disposal in wells suggests that the practice was often clandestine. It seems it was driven by local social pressures and a deep sense of shame, rather than a father simply exercising his legal right. This gap between what was legally allowed and what was socially hidden is the core of the unsolved horror at Ipplepen. And this wasn't just happening in a remote corner of Britain. The Ipplepen discovery is part of a much larger, empire-wide pattern. Similar massive infant disposal sites have been found across the Roman world. The most famous is a bathhouse sewer in Ashkelon, in modern-day Israel, where the remains of nearly 100 infants were discovered. Another was found in Roman London. This consistency, across vast geographical and cultural divides, points to a systematic social horror deeply entwined with the status of women, slavery, and the pressures of shame. The law may have allowed it, but it seems society demanded it be hidden from view, buried in the darkest places. From a modern forensic perspective, there's an immense challenge. It is often impossible for archaeologists to definitively prove infanticide from skeletal remains alone. We can't always distinguish a stillborn infant from one who was killed moments after birth. The way these children were disposed of, without any formal burial context, means there are no murder weapons or clear signs of trauma to find. So while the systematic disposal is undeniable proof of a horrific social practice, we may never know the precise number of murders versus the number of natural stillbirths that were treated with the same level of disgrace. The line between tragedy and murder is blurred by time and the nature of the evidence. Perhaps the most haunting aspect of this story is the silence. This wasn't a one-time event. The practice was carried out repeatedly over many years. This implies that the local community, the neighbors, the leaders, the people drawing water from those very wells, were likely aware of what was happening. This collective knowledge and silent acceptance of the systematic disposal of unwanted human life speaks to a profound social normalization. The shame was so powerful that an entire community seemingly chose to look the other way, allowing this horror to continue in the shadows. The moral context of the site, This shared unspoken secret remains profoundly unsolved. The Ipplepen Roman child burial site is a silent testament to a dark, systematic horror that festered in the shadow of the mighty Roman Empire, driven by social and economic shame. We know these children were unwanted. We know they were disposed of like trash. But the ultimate moral and legal responsibility for this collective trauma remains locked deep in the earth, a chilling secret of the Roman world. The shame of the unwanted child is a powerful horror. But now we turn to a different kind of shame, a horrifying act of collective self-mutilation and ritualistic suicide. We return for our final mystery to the arid landscape of the Judean desert, to the powerful fortress of Masada. This stronghold became the final sanctuary for the Jewish rebels, the Zealots, during the First Jewish-Roman War. In 73 AD, facing certain defeat by the massive Roman siege, the Zealots chose an extreme, desperate act of collective self-destruction that remains one of the most powerful and unsolved ethical and historical mysteries of the ancient world. The siege of Masada was the final brutal chapter of the revolt. The Roman army, led by Commander Flavius Silva, surrounded the fortress and built a massive engineered siege ramp up the side of the cliff. Imagine that, an entire army dedicated to one single goal: to breach these walls. The nearly year-long siege culminated when the Romans finally broke through. But when they entered the fortress, they found a chilling silence. No cries of battle, no surrender. This silence was the first sign of the horror they were about to discover. Our primary source for what happened is the Jewish historian Flavius Josephus. He was there. He saw the aftermath, but his loyalties are complicated. Josephus recounts that the zealot leader, Eleazar ben Yair, delivered two powerful, persuasive speeches, arguing that a free death was better than a life of Roman slavery. The narrative he paints is horrifying. The men killed their own wives and children. Then 10 men were chosen by lot to execute the remaining fighters. Finally, one last man killed the other 9 and then took his own life. Josephus claims 960 men, women and children died in this ultimate act of defiance. But here's the unsolved controversy. Josephus was a Roman sympathizer. Was he telling the unvarnished truth? Or was his narrative amplified for propaganda, a cautionary tale for his Roman masters? When archaeologists led by the famous Yigael Yadin excavated Masada in the 1960s, they expected to find a scene of mass death. They found evidence that largely corroborated Josephus's story: the destroyed food stores, the ritual baths, signs of a final desperate stand. But there was one massive, glaring problem. They found the skeletal remains of only about 28 individuals. 28. A tiny fraction of the 960 reported by Josephus. This physical evidence, though sparse, points strongly to a deliberate, organized final act. But the massive numerical discrepancy between the historical account and the physical evidence is the single most important unsolved contradiction of Masada. Where are the bodies? This huge contradiction fuels two competing unsolved theories. Theory A is the scavenging theory. It argues that Josephus's account is essentially true. The vast majority of the bodies were simply lost to time. They were successfully burned, their ashes scattered by the desert winds, or perhaps even consumed by scavengers or desecrated by Roman soldiers, leaving very few forensic traces behind for archaeologists to find thousands of years later. Theory B is the propaganda theory. It suggests that Josephus exaggerated the numbers to glorify the Roman victory and create a powerful moral lesson for his Jewish readers. Perhaps the event was a much smaller, more chaotic act of resistance, not the epic, orderly tragedy Josephus described. The truth is, with such a massive discrepancy, the true scale of the tragedy remains profoundly unsolved. We just don't know how many people truly died that day. Beyond the numbers, the event poses a terrifying, unsolved ethical and theological question. Was Masada an act of heroic, collective sacrifice, or was it a series of coordinated murders? According to Jewish law, suicide is strictly forbidden. So how did the zealots reconcile their faith with their actions? They found a chilling loophole. By having a chosen few execute the majority, they technically circumvented the taboo. This final choice, driven by a desperate desire for freedom, remains a profound moral and theological debate. Did they die as heroes, preserving their honor, or as victims of a calculated, extreme act of despair? Just when you think the story can't get any more intense, Yadin's team made a stunning discovery. In a storage room, they found 11 small inscribed pottery shards known as ostraka. This number is an eerie match for the 10 executioners and the one man chosen to kill them. Even more chilling, one shard was inscribed with the name Ben Yair, Eleazar's family name. Was this the very lot that sealed his fate? This evidence, though circumstantial, provides powerful physical proof that the final selection ritual, the drawing of lots, actually took place. It confirms the methodical, organized nature of the final act, just as Josephus described. Now try to imagine the psychological horror of that final night. The residents of Masada, trapped on that mountaintop, had to listen to their leader argue for death over slavery. They then had to watch their friends and family members carry out the executions. The decision was driven by an absolute fear of what Roman conquest meant. The women would be violated, the children enslaved, and the men tortured and killed for sport. The choice was between a death of honor and a life of utter degradation. This terrifying final choice, recorded in Josephus's harrowing speeches, is the core of the unsolved psychological motive that drove them to this extreme. Regardless of the true number of victims, Masada has become an absolute powerful symbol in modern history. The story of the final stand, the defiance against the mighty Roman Empire, and the choice of death over slavery has been enshrined as a national symbol of Jewish heroism and resolve. To this day, Israeli soldiers are sometimes sworn in on Masada, vowing, "Masada shall not fall again." The unsolved contradiction between the historical narrative and the archaeological facts only continues to fuel the symbol's incredible power. Masada is a powerful, terrifying symbol of final defiance, a story of mass suicide that remains archaeologically sparse and ethically complex. We know an organized tragedy occurred on that mountain, but the true scale and the moral justification for the final choice are locked in the dust of the Judean desert. This mystery, like all the horrors we have explored, from the headless Vikings to the screaming mummy, is a silent testament to the extreme, terrifying lengths to which humanity will go in the face of fear, faith, and political terror. The ultimate horror of history is not found in ghosts or monsters, but in the unsolved motives of the living. The investigation is closed for now, but the secrets of the dead remain open. Thank you for joining us on this journey through history's darkest and most fascinating mysteries. If you enjoyed this series, Please like, share, and subscribe for more deep dives into the unknown. We'll see you next time.